Okay, starting this. Welcome back to DJX Chronicles. I decided to come back to my favorite place ever, my favorite hunt. There you go. We get fucking good and toasted real quick because I'm lacking a toaster oven. Uh, all right, here we go. Today I compiled 4 poems by H.P. Lovecraft. I've presented 2 of these in the past, but it's gonna be Pomata Minora, Volume 2. I never did find a part 1 of that, by the way. Then The Poet's Nightmare, Aletheia Frikidores, and Nemesis, all by H.P. Lovecraft, as I said. And I did a little bit of a compilation because I didn't really want it to be just a short poem. And like I said, I've presented some of these before, but I feel like I can give it a different energy alongside these poems. So that's why I selected the ones I did, and I'm going to go on ahead and get started. I'm going to do the absolute best I can. There's some Latin in here. I don't know any of it. But Polemata Minora, Volume 2. Ode to Selene or Diana. Immortal moon, in maiden splendor shine. Dispense thy beams, divine Lotanus child. Thy silver rays all grosser things define, and hide harsh truth in sweet illusion mild. In thy soft light, the city of unrest, that stands so squalid in thy brother's glare, throws off its habit, and in silence, blessed, becomes a vision, sparkling, bright, and fair. The modern world, and all its care and pain, the smoky streets, the hideous, clanging mills, face neath thy beams, Selene, and again we dream like shepherds on Chaldea's hills. Take heed, Diana, of my humble plea. Convey me where my happiness may last. Draw me against the tide of time's rough sea, and let my spirit rest amid the past. To the old pagan religion. Olympian gods, how can I let ye go? And pin my faith to this new Christian creed? Can I resign the deities I know for him who on a cross for man did bleed? How in my weakness can my hopes depend on one lone God, though mighty be his power? Why can Jove's host no more assistance lend to soothe my pain and cheer my troubled hour? Are there no dryads on these wooded mounts, o'er which I oft in desolation roam? Are there no naiads in these crystal founts, nor nereids upon the ocean's foam? Fast spreads the new, the older faith declines, the name of Christ resounds upon the air. But my racked soul in solitude repines, and gives the gods their last received prayer. On the ruin of Rome. Low dost thou lie, O Rome, neath the foot of the Teuton slaves are thy men, and bent to the will of thy conqueror. Whither hath gone, great city, the race, the race that gave law to all nations, subdued the east and the west, and made them bow down to thy counsel? knew not defeat, but gave it to all who attacked thee, dead, and replaced by these wretches who cower in confusion, dead, they who gave us this empire to guard and to live in. Rome, thou didst fall from thy power with the proud race that made thee, and we base Italians enjoyed what we could not have builded. To Pan, seated in a woodland glen by a shallow, reedy stream. Once I fell a musing when I was lulled into a dream. From the brook a shape arose, half a man and half a goat. Hoofs it had instead of toes, and a beard adorned its throat. On a set of rustic reeds, sweetly played this hybrid man. Not cared I for earthly needs, for I knew that this was Pan. Nymphs and satyrs gathered round to enjoy the lively sound. All too soon I awoke in pain and returned to haunts of men. But in rural vales I'd fain live and hear Pan's pipes again. On the vanity of human ambition, Apollo, chasing Daphne, gained his prize. But lo, she turned to wood before his eyes. More modern swains at golden prizes aim, and ever strive some worldly thing to claim. Yet 'tis the same as in Apollo's case. For once attained, the purest gold seems base. All that man seeks, unworthy of the quest. Yet seek thy will, and never pause for rest. True bliss, methinks, a man can only find in virtuous life and cultivated mind. The Poet's Nightmare by, oh, I don't have to say who it's by. Damn it. Mess that up. A Poet's Nightmare, a fable. Loxus tumultus, semper cosa est. Lucullus languish, student of the skies and connoisseurs of rarebits and mince pies. A bard by choice, a grocer's clerk by trade, grown pessimist through honors long delayed. A secret yearning bore, that he might shine in breathing numbers and in song divine. Each day his fountain pen was wont to drop an ode or dirge or two about the shop. Yet naught could strike the chord within his heart that throbbed for poesy and cried for art. Each eve he sought his bashful muse to wake with overdoses of ice cream and cake. But thou, oh, but though the ambitious youth a dreamer grew, the okay, the Aeolian nymph declined to come to view. Sometimes at dusk he scoured the heavens afar, searching for raptures in the evening star. One night he strove to catch a tale untold in crystal deeps, but only caught a cold. So penned Lucullus with his lofty woe, till one dreary day he bought a set of Poe, charmed with the cheerful horrors there displayed. He vowed with gloom to woo the heavenly maid. Of Auber's tarn and Yannick's slope he dreams, and weaves an hundred ravens in his schemes. Not far from our young hero's peaceful home lies the fair grove wherein he loves to roam. Though but a stunted cot and vacant lot, he dubs it Tempe. He adores the spot when shallow puddles dot the wooded plain, and brimmed over muddy banks with muddy rain. He calls them limpid lakes or poison pools, depending on which bard his fancy rules. 'Tis here he comes with Helconian fire on Sundays when he smites the Attic lyre. And here one afternoon he brought his gloom, resolved to chant a poet's lay of doom. Rogates, the Thoris, and a book of rhymes provide the rungs whereupon his spirit climbs. With this grave retinue he trod the grove and prayed the fawns he might a poet prove. But sad to tell, ere Pegasus flew high, the not unrelished supper hour drew nigh. Our toneful swain the imperious call attends, and soon above the groaning table bends. Though it were too prosaic to relate the exact particulars of what he ate. Such long drawn lists the hasty reader skips, like Homer's well known catalogue of ships. This much we swear, that an adjournment neared. A monstrous lot of cake had disappeared. Soon to his chamber the young bard repairs, and courts soft somnus with sweet Lydian airs. Through open casement scans the star-strewn deep, and 'neath Orion's beams sinks off to sleep. Now start from airy dell the elfin train that danced each midnight o'er the sleeping plain, to bless the just or cast a warning spell on those who dine not wisely but too well. First, Deacon Smith they plague, whose nasal glow comes from what Homer hath called elixir pro, grouped round the couch his visage they deride, whilst through his dreams unnumbered serpents glide. Next troop the little folk into the room where snores our young Endymion, swathed in gloom. A smile lights up his boyish face, whilst he dreams of the moon, or what he ate at tea. The chieftain elf the unconscious youth surveys, and on his form a strange encampment lays. Those lips that lately thrilled with frosted cake, uneasy sounds in slumberous fashion make. At length their owner's fancies they rehearse, and lisp this awesome poem in blank verse. Aletheia freakidolis. Hold on. Okay. Aletheia friconis. Omnius risus et omnia polvis et omnia nihil. Demonic Clouds uppiled in chasmy reach of soundless reach of soundless heaven smothered the brooding night. Nor came the wonted wisp rings of the swamp, nor voice of autumn wind along the moor, nor muttered noises of the insomnious grove, whose black recesses never saw the sun. Within that grove a hideous hollow lies, half bare of trees. A pool in centre lurks, that none dares sound a tarn of murky face, though naught can prove its hue, since light of day, affrighted, shuns the forest shadowed bank. Hard by, a yawning hillside grotto breathes from deeps unvisited, a dull, dank air that sears the leaves on certain stunted trees which stand about, clawing the spectral gloom with evil boughs. To this accursed dell come woodland creatures, seldom to depart. Once I behold, upon a crumbling stone, set altar like before the cave, a thing I saw not clearly, yet from glimpsing fled. In this half dusk I meditate alone, at many a weary noontide, when without a world forgets me in its sun-blessed mirth. Here howl by night the werewolves and the souls of those that knew me well in other days. Yet on this night the grove spake not to me, nor spake the swamp, nor wind along the moor, nor moaned the wind about the lonely eaves of the bleak haunted pile wherein I lay. I was afraid to sleep, or quench the spark of the low burning taper by my couch. I was afraid when through the vaulted space of the old tower the clock ticks died away into a silence so profound and chill that my teeth chattered, giving yet no sound. Then flickered low the lights, and all dissolved, leaving me floating in the hellish grass of bloodied blackness, from whose beating wings came ghoulish blasts of carnal scented mist. Things vague, unseen, unfashioned, and unnamed jostled each other in the seething void, that gapped, chaotic, downward to a sea of speechless horror. How with writhing oath, foul with writhing thoughts. All this I felt, and felt the mocking eyes of the cursed universe upon my soul. Yet naught I saw nor heard, till flashed a beam of lurid lustre through the rotting heavens, playing on scenes I labored not to see. Methought the nameless tarn, alight at last, reflected shapes, and more revealed within those shocking depths that ne'er were seen before. Methought from out the cave a demon train, grinning and smirking, reeled in fiendish rout, bearing within their reeking paws a load of carrion viands for an impious feast. Methought the stunted trees with hungry arms groped greedily for things I dare not name, the while a stifling, wraith-like noisomeness filled all the dale, and spoke a larger life of uncorporeal hideousness awake in the half-sentient wholesomeness or wholeness of that spot. Now glowed the ground, and tarn, and cave, and trees, and moving forms, and things not spoken of, with such a phosphorescence as men glimpse in the cutuber or putrescent thickets of the swamp, where logs decaying lie, and rankness reigns. Methought a fire mist, draped with lucent fold, the well-remembered features of the grove, while swirling each bore in eddying streams the hot, unfinished stuff of nascent world, hither and thither through infinites of lights and darkness, strangely intermixed, wherein all entity had consciousness. Without the accustomed outward shape of life, of those swift circling currents, was my soul free from the flesh, a true constituent parts, nor felt I less myself for want of form. Then cleared the mist, and o'er the star-strewn scene, divine and measureless, I gazed in awe. Alone in space, I viewed a feeble fleck of silvern light, marking the narrow ken which mortals call the boundless universe. On every side, each as a tiny star, shone more creations faster than our own, and teeming with unnumbered forms of life, though we, as life, would recognize it not, being bound to earthly thoughts of human mold, as on a moonless night the Milky Way in solid sheen displays its countless orbs. To weak terrestrial eyes, each orb a sun, so beamed this prospect on my wandering soul. A spangled curtain, rich with twinkling gems, yet each a mighty universe of suns. But as I gazed, I sensed a spirit voice in speech didactic, though no voice it was, save as it carried thought. It bade me mark that all the universes in my view formed but an atom in infinity, whose reaches passed the ether-laden realms of heat and light, extending to far fields, where flourish worlds invisible and vague, filled with strange wisdom and uncanny life, and yet beyond to myriad spheres of light, to spheres of darkness, to abysmal voids that know the pulses of disordered force. Big with these musings, I surveyed the surge of boundless being. Yet I used not eyes, for spirit leans not on the props of sense. The docent presence swelled my strength of soul, all things I knew, but knew with mind alone. Time's endless vista spread before my thought with its vast pageant of unceasing change and sempiternal strife of force and will. I saw the ages flow in stately stream, past rise and fall of universe and life. I saw the birth of suns and worlds, their death, their transmutation into limpid flame, their second birth and second death, their course perpetual through the eons, toneless flight, never the same, yet bore again to serve the varying purpose of omnipotence. And whilst I watched, I knew each second's space was greater than the lifetime of our world. Then turned my musings to that speck of dust, whereon my form corporeal took its rise. That speck, born but a second's, whilst or which must die in one brief second more. That fragile earth, that crude experiment, that cosmic sport, which holds our proud aspiring race of mites, a moral vermin, those presuming mites, whom ignorance with empty humps adorns, and misinstructs in spacious dignity. Oh, specious dignity. Those mites who, reasoning outward, vaunt themselves as the chief work of nature, and enjoy, in fatuous fancy, the particular care of all her mystic, super-regnant power. And I strove to vision the sad sphere which lurked, lost in ethereal vortice. Methoughts my soul turned to the infinite refused glimpse. That poor atomic blight, that misbegotten accidents of space, that globe of insignificance, whereon my guide celestial told me dwells no parts of ephemeral or imperine virtue, but where breed the coarse corruptions of divine disease, the festering ailments of infinity, the morbid matter by itself called man. Such matter, said my guide, as oft breaks forth on broad creation's fabric, to annoy for a brief instant, ere assuaging death, heal up the malady its birth provoked. Sickened, I turned my heavy thoughts away. Then spake the ethereal guide with mocking mind, upbraiding me for searching after truth, visiting on my mind the searing scorn of mind superior, laughing at the woe which rent the virtue or vital essence of my soul. Methought he brought remembrance of the time when from my fellows to the grove I strayed, in solitude and dusk to meditate on things forbidden and to pierce the veil of seeming good and seeming beauteousness that covers o'er the tragedy of truth, helping mankind forget his sorry lots and raising hope where truth would crush it down. He spake, and as he ceased, methought the flames of fuming heaven resolved in torments dire, whirling in maelstroms of rebellious might, yet ever bound by laws I fathomed not, cycles and epicycles of such girth that each a cosmos seemed dazzled my gaze, till all a wild phantasmal glow became. Now burst athwart the flungent formlessness, a rift of purer sheen, a sight supernal, broader, that all the void conceived by man, yet narrow here, a glimpse of heavens beyond, of weird creations so remote and great that even my God assumed a tone of awe. Borne on the wings of stark immensity, a touch of rhythm celestial reached my soul, thrilling me more with horror than with joy. Again, the spirit mocked my human pangs, and deep reveled me for presumptuous thoughts. Yet, changing now his mind, he bade me scan the widening rift that clave the walls of space. He bade me search it for the ultimate. He bade me find the truth I sought so long. He bade me brave the unutterable thing, the final truth of moving entity. All this he bade and offered, but my soul, clinging to life, fled without aim or knowledge, shrieking in silence through the gibbering deeps. Thus shrieked the young Lucullus as he fled through gibbering deeps and tumbled out of bed. Within the room the morning sunshine gleams, whilst the poor youth recalls his troubled dreams. He feels his aching limbs, whose woeful pain informs his soul. His body lives again, and thanks his stars, or cosmoses, or such that he survives the noxious nightmare's clutch, thrilled with the music of the eternal spheres. Or is it the alarm clock that he hears? He vows to all the pantheon, high and low, no more to feed on cake or pie or Poe. And now his gloomy spirits seem to rise, and he the world beholds with clearer eyes. The cup he thought too full of dregs to quaff affords him wine enough to raise a laugh. All this is metaphor. You must not think our late enemy on prone to stronger drink. With brighter visage, and with lighter heart he turns his fancies to the grocer's marts. And strange to say, at last, he seems to find his daily duties worthy of his mind. Since truth proves such a high and dangerous goal, our bard seeks one less trying to his soul. With deep drawn breath, he flouts his dreary woe. And a good clerk from a bad poet grows. Now, close attend my lay, ye scribbling crew, that bay the moon in numbers strange and new, that madly for the spark celestial ball, in meters short or long, or none at all, curb your rash force in numbers or at tea, nor overzealous for high fancies be. Reflect, ere ye that or the drought Tyrian take. What worthy clerks or plumbers ye might make, wax not to frenzy or too frenzied in the leaping line, that neither sense nor measure can confine, lest ye, like young Lucullus, languish, groan beneath poetic nightmares of your own. Hold on. Good Lord. Last one. And my absolute favorite poem. Hold on. Give me a sec. I gotta get in the right spot. Through the ghoul guarded gateways of slumber, past the one mooned abysses of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the day break, being driven to madness with frights. I have whirled with the earth at the dawning, when the sky was a vaporous flame. I have seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. I have drifted o'er seas without ending, under sinister gray clouded skies, that the many forked lightning is rending, that resound with hysterical cries, with the moans of invisible daemons that out of the green waters rise. I have plunged like a deer through the arches of the hoary primordial grove, where the oaks feel the presence that marches and stalks on where no spirit dares rove. And I flee from a thing that surrounds me and leers through dead branches above. I have stumbled by cave-ridden mountains that rise barren and bleak from the plain. I have drunk of the fog-coated fountains that ooze down the marsh and the main. And in hot, cursed tarns I have seen things I care not to gaze on again. I have scanned the vast ivy-clad palace I have trod its untenanted hall, where the moon, writhing up from the valleys, shows the tapestried things on the wall. Strange figures, discordantly woven, which I cannot endure to recall. I have peered from the casement in wonder at the mouldering meadows around, at the many roofed village laid under the curse of a grave girdled ground, and from rows of white urn carven marble I listen intently for sound. I have haunted the tombs of the ages. I have flown on the pinions of fear, where the smoke belching Erebus rages, where the Jukuls loom snow clad and drear, and in realms where the sun of the desert consumes what it never can cheer. I was old when the pharaohs first mounted the jewel-decked throne by the Nile. I was old in those epics uncounted when and I only, was vile, and man, yet untainted and happy, dwelt in bliss on the far Arctic isle. Oh, great was the sin of my spirits, and great is the reach of its doom. Not the pity of heaven can cheer it, nor can respite be found in the tomb. Down the infinite eons come beating the wings of unmerciful gloom. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wand-mooned abysses of night, I have lived over my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sights, and I struggle and shriek ere the day break, being driven to madness with frights. And if you're not scared yet, I don't know what'll scare you. That was the Ode to Ancient Days, a compilation of poems from H.P. Lovecraft. I hope I did a good job. I'll see you next time. Please subscribe and whatever else. Bye.